let me introduce our guest for this evening from Istanbul. Joining us, Mr. Mehmet Ukçu, former Turkish diplomat from Manama. Joining us, Mr. Abdullah El-Janayed, Bahraini columnist and geopolitical analyst. And here in our Tel Aviv studios, Mr. Daniel Ayalon, former Israeli deputy foreign minister and former Israeli ambassador to the U.S. Thank you all, gentlemen, very much for joining us this evening. And our main topic for today, after a very long foreplay, so to speak, Israel and Turkey are friends again, but is it friends or frenemies? Let's take a closer look and pick up the conversation right after.
Over 4 years since their respective ambassadors were called home, Turkey and Israel have agreed to resume diplomatic relations with the return of ambassadors and consuls to both Tel Aviv and Ankara. This isn't a bolt from the blue. Earlier this year, Israeli President Isaac Herzog visited Ankara, whilst both foreign ministers, one of them the now incumbent Israeli Prime Minister Yair Lapid, visited their counterparts' capital soon after. Similarly, Israel and Turkey have cooperated in recent months to try and prevent Israeli tourists in Turkey from Iranian-backed assassination attempts. Lapid has commended this renormalisation by saying it will enhance economic and cultural ties, while Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has said that it will allow them to help their Palestinian brothers. But do they have ulterior motives? Occurring just after an Israeli war with Gaza and just before Israeli elections, is the timing of this announcement coincidental? What does Turkey gain or lose in this deal? Is Israel normalising ties with formerly hostile neighbours done to change the power dynamic of the Middle East in its favour, to isolate Iran, or simply to create a better future? What are the motives behind Israel and Turkey resuming relations?
So let's get to it. What are the motives behind Israel and Turkey resuming relations? You know the rules, gentlemen. You each get 30 seconds to lay out your initial stance on the matter, and we'll pick up the conversation right after. So, Mr. Ukçu, please take the lead.
Yes, I mean, it's not amazing. It's not a surprise that Turkey and Israel are upgrading their relationship. Now, normalization will be fully completed when ambassadors exchange between two capitals. Now, I think both parties are in the process of selecting high-caliber ambassadors that will help re-engage both nations forward. I think Turkish motive, first of all, not because they love Israel, Ankara, but because Ankara is in a difficult position.
Right, and Mr. Ukçu, we will elaborate on this challenging position in a split second. We'll just finish our 30-second round first, if we may. Mr. El-Janayed, your take?
I believe it's nothing but reaffirming the birth of a new regional geopolitics. Wow, short and precise, and I must say very uplifting to an extent. Last but not least, Mr. Ayalon, your thoughts?
Well, first of all, I totally agree with our Manama's friend. He put it in the best way. And again, succinctly put, if I can add something, is also cold and calculated interests. I think also we heard this from Mehmet from Turkey. I think there was a growing isolation of Turkey in the region, and most severely was the rupture of relations with the United States under Trump. Right. When Biden came in, it was very much expected.
Yes, and the road to Washington goes through Jerusalem, but perhaps Jerusalem is leading elsewhere nowadays as well, and we'll get to all of this in a second. And from this point onwards, gentlemen, please feel free to interact. And before we dive into perhaps interest or cold-hearted calculations, as you've put it, I don't want to sound, too naive or too romantic, but in diplomacy, can or should bad blood be forgiven and forgotten, or maybe it's not even an imperative goal, Mr. Ukçu?
Well, actually, if we stick ourselves to past bitterness and disagreements, we cannot move forward. As other speakers said, we are recalibrating in Turkey our foreign policy, and so Israel does itself. but it's also part and parcel of the new reconfiguration in the East Med, Middle East, and the Gulf. Israeli elections coming up, Turkish election is up in June 2023. There is a need to recalibrate the regional balances, and Israel is critically important, as one of the speakers said, especially for relations with Biden administration, where Ankara is having difficulty, great difficulty. Then FDI and finance flow to Turkey. They think that Israel might play a role. Tourism, economy, defense collaboration, and also exchange of spies. Mossad and MIT, I think, will be opening space for each other. I think there's a long-term strategic partnership is on the way. It's not there yet, but I believe that if both sides are serious, our future will be a good one between Ankara and Tel Aviv, irrespective of who sits in the capital. Because there's a long-standing relationship between Turkey and Israel. Whoever is in power, there might be some setbacks, but overall direction is that there will be a strategic partnership, win-win, based on mutual interest. I think we are moving into this direction. If there will be a change of government in favor of Netanyahu in the government in Tel Aviv, there might still be some difficulties because personal chemistries between Erdogan and Netanyahu didn't work in the past.
Didn't work is perhaps an understatement, and it's truly fascinating to look at the historic lens of relations between Israel and Turkey, since Turkey was a crucial element in Ben-Gurion, Israel's founding father. Ben-Gurion's periphery strategy of connecting Israel to the non-Arab superpowers here in the region. Back in the days, it was Ethiopia, Turkey and Iran, but a lot of change since. But let's go back to the discussion. Mr. Ayalon, a major test to this process of rapprochement was Operation Breaking Dawn. And to an extent, it went by quite successfully because President Erdogan, condemned the operation but did not blame Israel. Was he merely swallowing frogs, as we're saying in Hebrew, or is it a genuine change of heart?
Well, I'm not sure it's a genuine change of heart because he is very Erdogan. We know he's an Islamist, which is fine, but more of I would say, the kind of the brother, the Hamas or the Muslim Brotherhood, and in that case, the one that was engaged in the fighting with Israel was the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, which is totally sponsored by Iran, which is not a real friend of Turkey. So I think it was easier for Erdogan to, I would say, look aside or, not looking into the thing and not to condemn Israel too harshly, except to do the minimum which is required. But it was mostly a lip service. Right. But I think it's a very, just one more thing to say, I think it's a very, very important development in the region because both Turkey and Israel are located in very strategic junctures in the geopolitics of the Middle East. I would say also in Europe, when we come to also include Greece and Cyprus. But they are also complementing. These two countries complement each other in terms of tourism and economy and energy. So I think this is very good for the region, and I believe also it will make better relations between Turkey also and the Gulf countries.
Yes, and as we speak, the Israeli Prime Minister's office is releasing a statement saying that Erdogan and Lapid spoke this evening in the aftermath of this announcement. And before we talk regional ramifications, which are obviously many, Mr. El Janayed, this perhaps was easier, as Mr. Ayalon said, when it comes to the Gaza Strip, most notably Islamic Jihad. But what happens in the next round of boiling tensions in Jerusalem, most notably Temple Mount? It's a pan-Muslim issue. Will Erdogan be able to look sideways in this scenario?
Put it this way, we believe very much at the present time the best remedy for the situation with regard to the Palestinian-Israeli issue is for both parties to continue disengagement. They need a period of cooling down. But at the same time, what we need to do, previously nobody could, ignore or neglect the presence of Turkey in regional politics or its weight politically, economically, socially. But at the same time, we have decided regionally to look at Turkey, from other prism, not just the Erdogan prism. He found that his point of view had failed to secure any of his objectives. And now he also just recently, due to the East Med crisis, that Turkey in general is losing its position geographically because the Med is not that big, and we can bridge that gap by other means. Now it's up to Turkey to play as a supportive role in terms of finding a long-lasting solution with regard to the Israeli-Palestinian issue. But I believe both need to play a major role, and the Israelis need to play a higher important role in terms of facing up to the challenges that is facing Israel socially before the Palestinian.
Right, definitely a full plate in that sense. But before we move to that, Mr. Ogutchu, often security ties are the consequence, so to speak, of diplomatic ties. But this time around, in recent months, we've seen increasing security cooperation, most notably on the intelligence level between Ankara and Jerusalem, most notably over Iranian attempts to attack Israelis over Turkish soil. So what is the chicken and what is the egg here?
Well, I believe that security and intelligence collaboration is a very important dimension of this relationship. Even at the worst time of the relations between the two countries, I think Mossad and MIT work closely with each other, not very enthusiastically, but on a pragmatic basis, on exchange of intelligence as well as collaboration. And also one thing to add to other speakers, Erdogan made it very clear that if we are good friends with Israel, trusting each other, I think we can help out our Palestinian brothers better, he said.
Right.
And the same way, I think it could be a breach between Palestinians and Israel. The same way Israel could play a role in Syria, in northern Iraq, with regard to Kurdish issue, because both countries have certain leverage on this issue. Therefore, not only in Washington, Israel can help, but also in the region where Turkey is the biggest regional power to reckon with, militarily, economically, and politically. I think all indications show that it doesn't mean also that it will come at the expense of Israel's allies in Cyprus, in Greece, and elsewhere. Because this relationship rebuilding is not only with Israel, but also with Egypt, UAE, Saudi Arabia, and now we are talking increasingly about resumption of talks with Syria at certain levels. And therefore, you have to see it as the big picture in which Israel and Turkey are collaborating with each other to serve their
And the big picture will be exactly the topic of our follow-up debate right after the break, a 4-minute break. But you gentlemen are staying with us, and viewers, you should stay with us too. We're back with the summit in a tiny bit. Thank you, gentlemen, for staying with us. Before we dive back into the conversation, let's take a listen to I-24 News Middle East correspondent Ariel Osser on right outside the Turkish embassy here in Israel.
Today's announcement that Israel and Turkey are restoring full diplomatic ties and returning their respective ambassadors after 4 years has been in the making for some time. Prior to reconciliation steps which began in late 2020, the tumultuous ties between Jerusalem and Ankara hit their most recent low back in 2018 over deadly protests on the Gaza border. That would explain today's response by the Turkish foreign minister, who said that restoring ties with Israel won't come at the expense of defending the rights of Palestinians. Israeli leaders, however, were more fervent, with Prime Minister Yair Lapid calling the resumption of ties, quote, an important asset for regional stability. Looking forward, while it hasn't been announced officially, ambassadors are expected to return within a month, potentially opening what Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan recently called a new page in Israel-Turkey relations.
As we've been alluding to earlier in our conversation, another 30-second round each. Gentlemen, when the Arab Middle East bloc is becoming more and more predominant, Turkey naturally wants to join in. And my question to you is, Jerusalem becoming the new stop, a route to Abu Dhabi and Cairo? Mr. Al-Janayed, take the lead.
I believe it's up to all of us. Nobody could, discount the role of each other. But at the end of the game, hopefully, all of us will pitch in to find a sustainable final solution for this agonizing problem.
Mr. Uçu, excuse my poor Turkish pronunciation earlier. Your thoughts?
Yes, I believe that a new regional geopolitical order is emerging in our region. And that's the reason why Israel, Turkey, and other Arab countries are recalibrating their positions. I believe that this is going to be a long-term engagement of all parties: UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Egypt, Israel, and probably Syria at some point will be engaged in this process. And Turkey is the largest power to reckon with in this region. Without Turkey, nothing could be done as a positive or a disruptive power. I hope it's going to be a positive power that will work in the interest of all. So I think we are in this process right now.
Yes. Mr. Ayalon, last but not least.
Well, Ellie, if you look at the atlas, at the map, so Jerusalem is almost midpoint between Turkey and the Gulf countries. So certainly it lends itself to wonderful and almost natural cooperation. I think that this Jerusalem will become a very, very important point for new geopolitics and also new energy options, where if the Red Med pipe will be done, then the oil from the Gulf can go through Eilat to Ashdod and the Mediterranean, to Turkey and Europe.
And speaking of that point exactly, Mr. Al-Janayed, again, politics without geography are simply nothing. And when we're talking about oil and gas becoming more and more crucial, especially in light of the Ukraine war now, it's a matter of pure need on behalf of Ankara, right?
We believe, or personally I believe, that we have politically tried everything, in the books and off the books, and it's time for us to play by the rules of geoeconomics. I believe that's the best strategy for all of us to, let's say, work out all the knacks and develop certain processes, how the energy is going to go through from this region. I believe the Med producers, Lebanon, Israel, even the Palestinian of Gaza, and the Egyptian, hopefully soon we will. And I believe we will see probably new discoveries from Libya and Algeria. So the potential is unlimited. We also have the potential of exporting energy directly through Spain and Greece, produced by renewable energy sources, solar, or
simply put, Mr. Al-Janayed, we're stuck together, so we should at least try and get along.
We are. Yeah. Well, we'll make it better-looking picture. Trust me, Ellie.
Yes, and Mr. Ayalon, we cannot not mention Washington. And my next question is going to be, perhaps, albeit a bit provocative. Is Israel being utilized to an extent to whitewash Middle Eastern powers in their hopes of getting closer with Washington?
That could be, but Israel is a very willing and consenting partner here. Yes, diplomacy is also about maybe whitewashing, helping each other. You mentioned whether the bad blood between Israel and Turkey in the past could be washed away. Yes, and this is really the, I would say, the purpose and the role of diplomacy, to put new energy and new oil, clean oil, to really smoothen the relationship, and I think this is for everybody's interest in the region, and especially the moderate. Today we see the Middle East split between extremists and moderate, and we need the moderates to get together for stability and to really keep at bay all those nefarious forces which are trying to subvert and change altogether the geopolitics here. Turkey, unfortunately, at some point, was kind of on the fence, maybe going the wrong way. I'm very happy that it's going now the right way.
And speaking of which, Mr. Uchu, we did not elaborate on the big elephant in the Middle Eastern room, Iran. Is Turkey choosing sides, or rather, I'll put it that way, can Turkey refrain from choosing side? Is that sustainable?
Well, I think what Turkey is doing is quite admirable, although I don't have great sympathy for President Erdogan. What he's trying to do in terms of bridging gaps between the West and the rest is very important. It's playing a bridging role between Russia and Ukraine, and it's the only power who can talk to Tehran, Beijing, and also Washington and Brussels. Therefore, you need a power, medium-sized power like Turkey, to be able to shift sides, not in terms of moving from one bloc to another, but playing a constructive bridging role. Otherwise, the world will not be able to talk to each other, because NATO already, Turkey is a NATO member, declared Russia as a hostile power, and it came close to saying the same for China. If we exclude these two great powers in world geopolitics and economy, I think we will have a great trouble all around the world. And Israel is playing the same role somehow, not choosing a very clear side, but being able to talk to each other and play a positive, constructive engagement strategy. And this is realpolitik in a way. This is what our world needs. Otherwise, it will be two hostile powers, and then we will be squeezed in between. This is not in our interest, neither in Tel Aviv nor in Ankara.
Right, and interestingly enough, we've seen both Ankara and Jerusalem at least trying to play a conducive role when it comes to Russia and Ukraine way back when. And before we run out of time completely, in one sentence, Mr. Ayalon, a senior Israeli official said that if Erdogan returns back to the anti-Semitic rhetoric or anti-Israeli sentiment, Israel will not hesitate to roll back. Is that even an option?
It's always an option. I think Israel will look at it very, very severely. Anything which is anti-Semitic is something which is crucial and almost existential interest of Israel to fight. So I hope that the rhetorics will be put aside and only looking forward constructively.
Well, gentlemen, usually former diplomats and geopolitical analysts are a bit cynical or skeptic, and I must say that I enjoyed your optimism during this debate. Hopefully your predictions will be right, and we are witnessing a new Middle East. Word.
Yes, a word. I think we should all work together against anti-Semitism and also Islamophobia in the world.
Inshallah, Abdullah, Junaid, Mehmet, Uchu, and Daniel, thank you. Back in a bit.